Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 216 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, college football fans and Husker fans.
Hello, everybody. For those who may be listening to us for the first time, we are a father-son duo here to talk about college football by college football fans for college football fans. And today we're coming off of conference championship weekend in college football, and of course the announcement of the final 12-team playoff for this year and all the consternation and angst that has poured out as a result. So a lot to talk to about that. And even though Nebraska did not play a game this past weekend, there has been quite a bit of news in our world there as well. So we'll start off with the national and then get to the Husker talk later on.
That sounds like a good plan. There's lots to discuss.
Oh, yes. And before we dive into all that, we're going to go ahead and stick with our tradition and open up a cold beverage. I got myself a Golden Road Mango Cart here.
Okay. And I have my favorite Arizona beer from Four Peaks Brewing Company, Kilt Lifter.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. Okay.
Yeah, in terms of national news, before we get into the conference championship games, one piece of news we did want to mention was one of the big revolutions on the coaching carousel. We went through all that on last week's podcast, and one of the, odd men out who was still left without a coach at the time was Penn State. But since then, they did manage to secure somebody because they weren't able to get Utah's coach. So they ended up getting Matt Campbell from Iowa State, who has kind of, been in and out of various conversations about being a head coach at a bigger program for quite some time. So now he's getting that opportunity. Seems like people generally seem to think, they landed on a good hire at the end of the day, even though I know Matt hasn't done like as well in the past couple years as he was, maybe earlier in the 2020s or 2019, that kind of period.
Okay. No, I disagree. Last year, you may recall, they were right in the thick of it. I think they won like 10 or 11 games last year. Now, I will concede the couple of years before that had been less eventful, but I'm fairly certain that last year, and of course this year, he's done pretty well too. But I will look that up here real quick while you continue to go down your list, okay?
Right. Well,
and I'll get back to that.
Yeah. Well, they're 8-4 this year. Iowa State is, and you're right. Okay, last year they were 11-3.
Yeah,
that's right. They were right in the thick of it, so that's fair. I shouldn't be judging him so much. But yeah, I mean, how do you feel about the Matt Campbell hire for Penn State? You think it's a good one?
Oh, you know what? Given that, they're trying to claim that he was higher on their list, but they couldn't find his number, and that's why it took them so long to get connected with Campbell. I have a little bit of a hard time believing that, but they went through quite a number of people that at least were reported in the media as having serious discussions for the job, who all opted to basically pass and leverage it to get new deals with their own schools, including our own Matt Rule. And then they eventually got to Matt Campbell. But I think Matt is a good choice. I really do. The big question mark is what's he going to do with the resources and the prestige of that institution versus where he's been coaching. But in terms of being a coach, I think he's demonstrated that he's a darn good coach.
Right. Yeah. No, I would agree. I retract my previous statement. So yeah, in terms of the conference championship games, there were, of course, the group of 5 conference championship games in the AAC and the Sun Belt. Tulsa won their big game against North Texas, 34-21, and James Madison beat Troy 31-14. I remember I was keeping an eye on that James Madison score because it was quite close earlier on in the game, but I think in the fourth quarter they kind of pulled away.
Right, right. Well, and as you say, because of how other things unfolded, that became huge, right? That those two teams did what they did.
Yep. They did what they needed to do. The higher ranked
Yeah.
teams stayed in there. Um, and then we did give predictions for the Power Four conference championship games on our previous podcast. Let's go ahead and start off with the first one of the day, which was BYU versus Texas Tech. I went ahead and predicted that BYU would beat Tech this time in a narrow fashion, 24-21, while you went Texas Tech's way, but also with a more narrow margin, 35-31. And the final score for that one ended up being 34-7. So quite the blowout that neither of us quite expected.
Well, and my sense was, speaking of the Penn State hiring, he was all but on the plane to head to Penn State,
Right.
and then hang in at BYU. So I don't really think he was fully focused, and that's
Right.
kind of maybe in his team's play a little bit.
Yeah, well, right. We did speculate about that. I remember because we thought, well, with their coach, confirming they're staying at BYU rather than leaving for Penn State, maybe that gives them a spurt of motivation. But it seems like
Right.
the distractions may have been more prevalent than the joy there. And yeah, that one. It's hard to win when you're down 4-0 on the turnover margin, which BYU was. Only had 200 yards of offense. So it was really a story of Texas Tech's defense that they paid so much money for in the offseason, coming through and dominating.
Oh, exactly. And what I found interesting during that broadcast was how much time the announcers spent talking exactly about that and glorifying it and praising it as this great thing. There's no longer shame in going out and buying a championship, which is exactly what Texas Tech did. And the attitude has changed from that was somehow not something you wanted to do, that you still wanted to build from within, to where now it's now glorified as, hey, those are the rules. You're dumb if you're not doing it.
But wouldn't you say the media was already kind of saying that last year with Deion Sanders in Colorado, and how it seemed like he had turned that program around and had all this talent that he had transferred in?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, they're not the first group to do that. I'm just saying that it is becoming more prominent that these teams that clearly have taken that path are being praised, rather than talking about how that doesn't mesh. Now, I will say that with the Colorado thing, now this year, without the benefit of his superstar son and Hunter, there was plenty of conversation talking about how their culture was broken and they have issues because of the approach that Coach Sanders has used.
Right. Well, and let's see with Tech, right? When all these great, juniors and seniors they've brought in graduate or go to the draft or whatever, and they have to rebuild again. Can you just keep going back to that well over and over again? That kind of remains to be proven, right?
Right, that you can consistently do it. We're on year 2 of Indiana using that technique and being successful. So there's definitely a way to go to do it and be successful with it. And Indiana didn't do it by just opening their checkbook. Indiana's approach is much more sophisticated and I think nuanced, with superior evaluation that gives them a leg up that probably is more sustainable, frankly, than this other way where you're just writing checks to whoever has the biggest, appearance of upside.
Yeah. Now, the second game of the day, I did sit down and watch all these games, which was fun. Was of course Georgia, Alabama in the SEC. I went in and predicted that Georgia would get their revenge and beat Alabama 27-24. And you went the opposite way, saying Alabama would win 27-24 to their advantage. And we were right about the first score. Georgia got 28 points. but Alabama only got 7. So not
Yeah.
quite the close affair both of us were thinking. Frankly, a
No.
very impressive showing by Georgia's defense this time.
Yes, and frankly, that score is not indicative of how big the margin should have been in terms of how the teams performed. Yeah, Alabama showed up with their C game just like they did against Auburn, and I was expecting some kind of a response to the poor showing at Auburn, and I didn't get it. You know what I mean? That definitely makes me feel differently about Alabama as a football team going forward.
Right. Well, it's interesting when you look at the stats for the game because Georgia had 297 yards to Alabama's 209. So not like Alabama wasn't able to get anything going. But the caveats to that are that Alabama had the 1 turnover of the game, and they were doing it basically all by passing the ball. They had -3 rushing yards by the end of the game.
Right, right. They just could not establish any semblance of a running game.
Yeah, right. Well, and Alabama finally did score late in the game. Kept it from being a
Yep.
shutout. Got the ball back from Georgia, and that was kind of like their last ditch attempt. I think there was still like 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter, but they were down by 14 points there, so they went for it on a 4th down, deep on their own side of the field. Didn't get it, which left Georgia at their own 12-yard line and gave them an easy touchdown. So I will say, that 28 points of Georgia is a little bit inflated because of that easy score.
Well, yeah, but there were also some opportunities to score that Georgia missed on throughout the game, in my opinion,
Right.
where they were in a dominant position and moving the football and should have led to points,
Right.
but didn't.
True, which has been reflective of them all year, right? We've kind of compared them at Oklahoma in that both of them have amazing defenses, but have kind of struggled sometimes offensively. I will say I gave threw a little bit of shade on Gunnar Stockton on last podcast, saying that he can be a little hit or miss as a quarterback. He's not like a true difference maker, like great talent. But he was 20 of 26 for 156 passing yards in this game, so very consistent. And ran the ball when he needed to get first downs and things like that. So he actually played very well.
He did. He played very well, and yep, exactly, and even ran it a few times and with some success. So,
yep. So, quite a statement win for Georgia, considering Alabama beat them earlier in the year, which of course got some people talking, throughout the day about the playoff implications that could possibly come from that. And then, of course, in the Big Ten, there was Ohio State versus Indiana. I went ahead and said that Indiana would win 35-30, while you said that Ohio State would win in a high-scoring game 45-21. Ended up being quite a different sort of game, much more defensive game, where Indiana won it 13-10. Kind of, I would say, a bit similar to Georgia. Frankly, they should have won it by more. They had plenty of opportunities to score, but Ohio State's defense, kept them out of the end zone on a few occasions, and Indiana's defense had to kind of come up clutch in some moments to keep Ohio State from getting ahead.
oh yeah, I mean, Indiana's defense, I think, was kind of the story of the game, and really, although it was much lower scoring than I expected it to be, it was because both teams, and particularly Indiana's, was more of a surprise. Both teams played excellent defense, and I just think both teams played well. I was more frustrated with the refereeing, which has been an ongoing theme for me for a number of years here in the Big Ten. It just blows me away that with this conference and all the money that is involved and everything like that, that they haven't been able to find a way to put together better refereeing crews than the ones that we have currently. Because and I'm not saying necessarily that the crew was hugely in favor of one side or the other in terms of calls and such, but the lack of offensive holding was atrocious. and the inconsistency of calls for pass interference were also an issue. They were ticky tack. They were really calling it pretty tight at times, but then other times they would let things go away. They'd let people get away with stuff, and it just doesn't make sense. I mean, do we not have enough referees on the field? Apparently, it's crazy that this stuff is getting missed.
Right. Yeah, you showed me one clip that was pretty egregious of an Ohio State defender just getting mugged by the Indiana offensive line, and it didn't get called for holding.
Right. Well, and there was definitely at least one or two examples of that I could have sent you that were the reverse, that were Ohio State. So,
right.
So I'm not saying it was one side or the other. I'm just saying the refereeing in that game was very poor.
Yeah.
And for a championship level game, that is unacceptable.
Good old Snodgrass. They mentioned his name. Of course, I remember him from some past big games.
Yes. And how does he continue to draw the straw for these premier games when that crew is shitty?
I don't know. But yeah, both teams had one turnover, where they kind of gave the other team easy opportunity to score with a short field, and Ohio State actually capitalized on that opportunity, got 7, whereas Indiana only got 3 when Ohio State gave them an easy field. So Indiana was down 6-10 at halftime. They had missed a 39-yard field goal as well in that half.
Yep.
But then they came out and had a nice long drive to score their 7 and get up to 13 in the game. And Ohio State's kind of, you could say their aggressiveness came back to bite them, or some of their weakness on special teams. Because apparently, I haven't been watching Ohio State, throughout the years, but apparently this field goal kicker of Ohio State's has kind of had the case of the yips sometimes in high pressure moments. And so on a 4th and 1, at one point in the game, Ohio State went for it and didn't get it, just barely got stopped. And then on a 4th and 1 later in the game, they went for a 27-yard field goal that would have tied the game, and that kicker missed it, which was obviously enormous.
Right, exactly. Well, and the play calls and the whole timing aspect, the sequencing on that, when they did go for it on 4th and 1, that was at the goal line. That should have been a touchdown sequence there.
Well,
it wasn't.
It wasn't at the goal line, but it was at like the 6-yard line. It was close.
Okay. All right.
Because remember, they said that they got it, and then they reviewed it, and just said, actually, you didn't get the first down.
Right. That's true. Yep. But I just, some of that was play calling. Some of that is that, they have a tiny little quarterback, unlike, say, how Iowa does it. I'm shocked that some of these teams who got to play after the Nebraska-Iowa game didn't get wind of the Iowa bush push thing, because that was so effective.
Right. But like you say, you gotta, Iowa had clearly practiced it. Their fullback would come up behind the quarterback, knew exactly what to do to push him, and their quarterback, has some meat to him and all that. So you do need the proper ingredients to make that so effective as Iowa did.
No, I agree, but I would argue that makes it even more important that you have that big tight end, basically going in motion and then lining up behind that dude, or coming out of a fullback position if you needed to, and just pushing him, ass up, boom, just shoving him across the top of the pile.
Right. But yeah, so obviously that was a bit of an upset. Indiana is now, because they beat number 1 and they were number 2. Now Indiana is the top ranked team in the country. And I saw the crazy stat from a fan who mentioned that Indiana hasn't won a bowl game in 34 years, but they're now the number 1 team in the country, going to the playoff.
You mean hasn't won a conference championship?
No.
They've won a bowl game.
No. They probably haven't won a conference championship in even longer than 34 years. No, the point was they haven't won a bowl game in 34 years. They've been to bowl games, but they haven't won them. And
Oh,
last year they didn't go to a bowl game because they were in the playoff, right?
right. Gotcha. Huh.
So,
Okay.
you know, obviously they would have qualified for a bowl
Yeah.
game last year. So
Semantics. Yeah.
if
Right.
you want to call it 33 years, still, it goes to show how amazing it is what Kurt Tagnetti has done in 2
Oh, yeah.
years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
They're calling it the greatest turnaround in college football history. And if he actually takes it to the ultimate and wins a national championship, then, I mean, some folks were talking about that today earlier. I mean, somebody probably has already secured the movie rights. Alex, Mr. Movie Man, you should be seeking a way to secure the movie rights and get a script. You better get on that right now tonight. Start writing a script where Indiana wins this national championship. You have it done and on somebody's desk before it actually, on the night that it happens in real life.
There you go. There you go. And then last game we have to talk about is from the ACC. That one was Duke versus Virginia. And we both went Virginia's way. I said Virginia would win 35-24, while you went Virginia's way 28-21. So you did say it would be closer. And yeah, that one was going on at the same time as the Indiana game. I was flipping back and forth between it, and ended up coming down to overtime with Duke winning 27-20.
Yes. Well, and yeah, the overtime thing after they allowed Virginia to score late in the game and tie it. I thought, oh shoot, it's over. The storybook is getting closed here, and then in the overtime, Virginia's going to win and blah blah blah. Because it was, I mean, Virginia was the favorite by a considerable amount, but then, my gosh, I mean, I feel like Duke was dominant in the overtime.
So I was flipping back and forth between the Duke game and the Indiana game. Like I said, like when one would go to commercial, I'd go to the other, that kind of thing. And Duke was definitely the more physical team all night, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And they were actually up 20-10 with only a little bit remaining, 5 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter. So they done a good job of keeping Virginia, out of the end zone. I think at one point it might have been even like 17 or 20-3, something like that. Maybe it wasn't that big, but point is they were looking good. They were kind of dominating, but then they let Virginia have a drive to get a field goal. They didn't get anything out of their time with the ball. And in fact, when they should have been running clock, they ran it on third down and the guy went out of bounds, which gave, Virginia either, however you want to think of it, 40 seconds or saved a timeout for them, which Virginia then used to drive the ball down the field, score their touchdown to tie the game. And yeah, I would agree. I was kind of pessimistic, but Duke got the ball and just ran it a bunch of times, and then it came down to a fourth down play, and their coach, to his credit, went gutsy and decided to go for the touchdown rather than kicking the field goal there, and they got it.
Right. On a pass play, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yep. It was a pass play. And then Virginia came out there and immediately threw a pick, and it was game over.
Yeah, they didn't really even give themselves a chance on the response. But yes. But I just love the physical nature of how they moved from the 25 down to the right near the goal line, and then they ended up scoring with the pass. But it was definitely the dominance physically that put them in that spot. But that created the chaos.
Yeah, I was thinking of texting my younger sister Olivia because she's employed at Duke University, so I got to imagine people were partying that night in her area.
Oh, I bet they were. Absolutely.
But yeah, because the group of 5 conference championship games that already happened earlier in the day, the camera would occasionally show these like 2 James Madison fans who are there at the Duke game, because if Duke won, they would be a conference champion. Duke is 7-5, I guess 8-5 after their win. So no way they were going to get in the top 12, which meant James Madison, as the next highest ranked conference champion, was going to get into the playoff, which is what ended up happening.
That's one of those crazy things, and it really goes back to the set of circumstances or rules that are used by the ACC to determine their two opponents in their conference championship game. Most of the other conferences had already modified their structure for playoff. For their conference championship game to include the highest ranked teams as one of the key tiebreakers, right? They don't have that in the ACC, which is why Miami was left out, even though they were ranked whatever the 12th or 13th or right in that range, and would have clearly been the highest ranked ACC team, but they didn't even play in the conference championship game.
Yeah. I would assume that after all the publicity that has gotten here, the ACC is going to change that rule to be something more logical.
Yeah, I suspect that they will be told in no uncertain terms by the other leagues, don't ever let this happen again.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there's reasons it won't happen next year that we'll go into later. But yeah, so that obviously left us with some shakeups in the college football playoff. There was some question of would Ohio State be 2, or could potentially Georgia, with their strong win over Alabama, maybe jump all the way up to 2, and Ohio State would be 3. Where would Alabama end up being ranked? What about Notre Dame and Miami? Because Notre Dame was in the top 12 ranking as of the previous week, but a lot of people have pointed out, hey, Miami beat them in the head-to-head and has the same record as them, so why is Notre Dame getting the nod above them? And those things did end up playing out in the final rankings. Some teams did get moved down. For example, BYU got bumped down for their loss, which then brought Miami and Notre Dame basically being right next to each other in ranking, which according to the committee is what made them more fully consider that head-to-head win of Miami over Notre Dame, and then end up changing it. So Miami was at 10 and Notre Dame was at 11, meaning that with the Tulane at 20 and James Madison at 24, those two filled out the bottom 2 ranks. So that meant Notre Dame was the one who kind of got left out.
Right, exactly. And what's crazy about that is if you look at history, some of these things there's no precedence for them. BYU lost to the number 4 ranked team in the country, and they dropped considerably. And Alabama, who lost to Georgia, didn't drop at all. There were so many things that were not logical. The fact that they apparently have a rule in place for this committee where they do these 1-to-1 comparisons. So the fact that there was one team, BYU, in between Notre Dame and Miami, they didn't consider looking at Miami and Notre Dame to say, and look at that group of 3 teams at least that were right around each other and say, what's going on here, or even include Alabama, which was ahead of them. I mean, you could have looked at those 4, and those 4 should have been looked at back and forth and crosswise. Because I think if they had done that and been honest with themselves and did eye test as well, which they claim is significant, they would have determined that Alabama was the worst of those 4 teams, and that Notre Dame should have been forward one, and possibly BYU should not have been as low as they were, and certainly shouldn't have dropped because they lost to the number 4 team in the country. If you're not going to drop Alabama at all when they lose to the number 3 team in the country.
Right. Well, yeah. So BYU was 11 and they dropped to 12. So they dropped 1 spot, but obviously that was significant.
That's huge.
And yes, the hypocrisy was certainly pointed out where, they've said that, we're not going to punish you for losing in the conference championship game. Conference championship game can only help you, can only benefit you, unless it's, like them moving Indiana up to 1 and Ohio State's number 2. Like, that's very logical because the 2 teams played each other, and Indiana won. So, of course, they deserve to be number 1 over Ohio State. So even though Ohio State dropped one spot, it didn't really affect them that much. So, I think nobody's complaining about that. It's more so about the BYU being dropped for losing to Texas Tech, but Alabama, who looked pretty darn bad as well against Georgia, doesn't drop at all.
Well, and not just, the thing is, again, you got a human committee and they're supposed to be looking at the totality. If they start looking at the totality of Alabama's season and they look at even the recent, if you want to look at recent games, the Auburn game, I mean, the number of times that Alabama, struggled to win against inferior teams that they should have been able to handle, right? As well as, the losses that they sustained. And then you look at a BYU who pretty much kicked butt on everybody except Texas Tech, and they had to play them twice. So, granted, Alabama went 1-1 with Georgia, right? That's their claim to fame, is that Georgia victory. But that's kind of as far as it goes with Alabama. So I just think there's a lot of arguments, certainly, that would have argued for BYU to still be in that mix, and yet that's the least argued thing. I haven't even touched on the ones that everybody's been going crazy about, which, of course, is Notre Dame getting ousted in favor of Miami. And that has created all kinds of ripple effects, including serious deterioration in the ACC Notre Dame relationship because of what happened.
Right. Yeah. I will say, to Alabama's credit, they did beat Vanderbilt 30-14, who ended up being ranked 14th, right? So that was another good win in their cap. They also beat Missouri and Tennessee. They beat Wisconsin from the Big Ten.
Right, but now you start getting, and Wisconsin was one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. Right. The worst teams, right? Even worse than Nebraska. I mean, that win means nothing except the fact there's a name, Wisconsin, that is a team that has historically in recent years been good, right? But it means nothing about this year. Again, the SEC bias on rankings also, your win-loss record against ranked teams and that sort of stuff is diminished in value because the rankings are influenced, are in my opinion suspect, because it's so clear that the ESPN network has an influence that is inappropriate for all of that stuff. Their properties always get the benefit of the doubt, and what has played out here effectively has done that. There's a reason why Notre Dame got screwed in this thing. They're not an ABC ESPN property. And surprisingly, the ACC, which is an ESPN property, and the SEC, which is an ESPN property, ended up getting the greatest benefits from this, both from the standpoint that, frankly, the way it all played out, if things had been more typical, let's say, versus previous years with this committee, then Notre Dame would have had that final spot, and the ACC would have been on the outside looking in, and Miami would not have pushed over the top.
But
okay, now I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying that's what history says should have happened.
Like we said, the fact that Notre Dame was ranked above Miami the previous week, and apparently, like you say, BYU, losing, and now Miami and Notre Dame being directly next to each other in the rankings suddenly made that head-to-head way more important to them, which I personally think is an excuse to cover their butt that they saw the amount of criticism they were getting for the fact that Notre Dame was above Miami at all. Like you and I, in our text threads, we were saying, Miami should have been ahead of Notre Dame to begin with, right? So in terms of Miami getting in over Notre Dame, I'm not going to attribute that so much to the ESPN bias for the ACC, because I think Miami had a legitimate argument to deserve to be in over Notre Dame. But it seemed like they were retroactively, covering their butts rather than, having been more upfront and genuine about their own rules in the previous weeks.
Covering their butts to who? Because remember, who's writing the checks for these games?
ESPN.
Who's writing the checks? ESPN and ABC, right? The old,
the mouse,
Mickey Mouse ears, right? So I'm sorry, I can't separate those two things. Also, keep in mind, speaking of SEC bias, which is where their real bread is buttered, right? Alabama had moved ahead of Notre Dame the previous week for no logical reason, because Alabama had looked like crap in their game against Auburn, and yet they moved ahead of a Notre Dame team that had been ahead of them for weeks prior.
Right.
There's so many of these moves that this committee did that didn't make any sense, right? And BYU, I think, has a legitimate argument, because you can see them, kicking butt all season long and nothing happens. They don't move. Vanderbilt was complaining for a similar reason, because they're not one of the signature properties of the SEC. Maybe they don't get the benefit of the doubt that other SEC teams get, because they also kept winning and never moved in the rankings, right? While other teams around them were moving.
Right.
And it's just not easily explained, except that they had a vision of where things kind of oughta, shoulda be at the end of the year, and they manipulated it to get there. And you can't tell me that is not dramatically influenced by the people who are writing the check. And that's the mouse ears.
Well, yeah. And, as people have pointed out, how convenient is it that, so many of these times where, an SEC team has gotten the benefit of the doubt or gotten some extra pull that they probably should have been. Who's been the beneficiary? Alabama. So clearly the committee has a love affair with Alabama. Though, once again, I will give them some credit in that, they are certainly under some external pressures, because if they punished Alabama and dropped them out of the playoff for losing in the fashion they did to Georgia, then that makes Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, very angry, and he starts rattling sabers about how, he's going to, change their conference championship game or do something different, because why would Alabama even want to play in a conference championship game against a good team if they, lose, then they get bumped out, while Oklahoma and Ole Miss were able to just sit on the sidelines and get in while doing nothing,
Right. Totally.
So there is that balancing act to it too, from a political perspective.
Well, I get that, which is again why I feel like, trying to utilize opportunities to make maybe the conference championship games or extend the playoff, so that we can get a bunch of these games on the field, so teams can play at the end of the year with all of the injuries and coaching changes and all the other stuff, impacting that set of circumstances, and then play the games, and whoever wins those games moves on, survive and advance. And we can't seem to get there, because the money is so big that, like, for example, now, because of how this is all played out, the SEC is going to get $20 million for the first week of that playoff. $20 million.
Right.
And the next closest is 12. So almost twice as much as the Big Ten. And yet the Big Ten has, three of the top 4 or 5 teams in the playoff. Hard to believe that our conference, that the Big Ten, can produce those high level teams, and then there's no one else that's even in consideration.
Right.
It sounds like they have something wrong with their strength of schedule components and some of these other things.
We went into that a bit last week, right? I made the point that the Big Ten is top heavy, and Indiana and Ohio State are undefeated, and they've smoked everybody they played, versus there's no undefeated teams in the SEC, right? They've cannibalized each other a little bit more. And Indiana and Ohio State may very well end up, getting to the top 4 and winning the whole thing. And then over the course of, those extra games that they play beyond the SEC teams, the Big Ten may end up in the end having more money overall, than the SEC did or whatever.
If you look at the bracket, that's doubtful.
The quality might end up, winning out there over quantity.
Maybe. But and I'm not even saying Georgia, isn't close to the best team in the country. They might very well be. I'm not saying that they're not. But what I am saying is that a team like Alabama, or Ole Miss, are propped up, in my opinion, in part by combination of their connection with ESPN and all the other things that go into an 8-game versus 9-game schedule, and all of these things that lead to this perception that somehow the SEC is better.
Talking about the future here for the playoff, because obviously there have been all sorts of speculation about, the playoff expanding and all the different proposals, the 16, the 24, 14, all that kind of stuff. And, nothing has been landed on. So as of right now, some of the rules are changing, but it's going to be the 12-team playoff in 2026 and moving forward as of right now. And where I'm coming down on is I like having the conference championship games, right? I think it's, we fought for so long to get all the conferences to actually get a conference championship game, right? Like back in the day, the Big 12 didn't have one and things of that nature. Didn't have enough teams to do it or whatever. So we've gotten to the point where everyone's doing it. And, watching those games this weekend was a lot of fun, right? Scrolling between these major games, giving teams something to strive for beyond just getting into the playoff, like saying, oh, I'm the, 10th seeded team in the playoff this year. Personally, to me, that's not as cool as saying I'm the number one team in the ACC or whatever. Right. So getting to say I'm the best in my conference. So I think keeping those alive is important. But to the point I just raised, you have to ensure that you aren't punished for losing in your conference championship game, even if you get blown out like Alabama and BYU kind of did this past weekend. So to do that, I think you have to make it so that from the Power Four conferences, the top 2 teams, meaning the top 2 in the conference championship game, need to be guaranteed to be in. Whether, no matter what happens, which means ACC, you need to change your rules to get a better tiebreaker so Miami isn't left out or whatever. So you need to do that. But now, so now all of a sudden you've got 8, teams guaranteed right there. And the Big Ten and the SEC are going to wave their hands and say, hey, it's not fair if we're getting 2 guaranteed in and so is the Big 12 and the ACC, even though they're significantly weaker than we are. That's not fair. So we should get a 3rd guaranteed, right? So, maybe they get a 3rd in. So now that's 10 teams guaranteed. Plus you have the guarantee to the group of 5 champions. So that's 11. So that's leaving you now with only, under a 12-team playoff, only 1 spot as the at-large spot, which, under the current...
Or Notre Dame. Or BYU, now BYU is no longer independent, but independent teams.
Right. Well, so that then would go to, based off the rules that are established for 2026, to Notre Dame if they're ranked anywhere in the top 12 by the committee, or then to whoever else, gets that final spot. And maybe in some ways that's good because, like you say, we're trying to take more of the hands of the committee because they've clearly proven that they can't be trusted. But, I guess, does that also then run the risk of growing stagnant if it's like, these same like guaranteed positions every single year? Do we need to make it 16 teams to make what I just proposed work?
Yes, you'd absolutely have to go to at least 16. Because here's a great example. The SEC would never agree to something like that, given the fact that with the power of their television partner, they were able to get 5 in this year, Alex. Why would you ever agree to only 3? When the system that exists now, as chaotic and argumentative as it is typically going to give you way more than you should get. All right, you're already getting the benefit of the doubt. So trust me, the SEC has no interest in changing the status quo.
Right,
they're not going to do it. I mean, the Big Ten's not going to be able to push them off of that unless the Big Ten wins the national championship. This becomes a hugely important tournament for us now, because if the Big Ten doesn't win this championship, then the Big Ten's leverage against the SEC will be diminished. It will be damaged as a result. And as they get in their meetings, in their fancy hotels and they discuss things, the SEC is going to smugly basically say, unless you guys present something to us that gives us a built-in advantage in perpetuity, we have no interest, because right now, with our ESPN partner sitting by our side, we're sitting fat. Thank you very much.
Right.
And that's why this stuff all frustrates me.
Right. Now, as we mentioned last year, right, it was only 3 SEC teams and 4 Big Ten teams. So they only got their 3 because of how things played out. So if we go to 16 teams under what I just said, right, so that's basically 11 guaranteed, automatic qualifiers, basically, amongst that group. And you have the special arrangements for Notre Dame and everything. So they'll often be in as a 12th team in that year. But then we're just shifting the arguments we're having right now from which teams are ranked, 11th and 12th to, okay, which teams are ranked 16, 15, 14, right? And, they'll find a way to get in a Vanderbilt and a Missouri, and the SEC will still end up with more teams, than they maybe should. But at the very least, then the conference championship thing isn't a debate anymore, I suppose. So that's
no, I agree with you on that. I think getting rid of that so that the conference championships effectively, if you make it to the conference championship, you're guaranteed a spot in the playoff, because you cannot be hurt by playing in the championship. The championship is meant to celebrate your conference and to pursue, a recognition as your conference champion. Period. Right. It has no other bearing. So they could pick the 16 teams in the playoff or whatever even before the conference championship weekend happens, and that would give the bowl games more chance to more time to do their invites and get people scheduling trips to the bowl destinations. It might actually help bowl attendance, non playoff bowl attendance, right? Because you'd already know who was in and who was out, because there's no other games going on. The season's over, except for the conference championships, right? So with maybe the rare exception, say like this weekend, there's the Army-Navy game type of thing where maybe something like that would have an impact on a particular year. But by and large, it would be done. They could make the decisions. They could make a whole decision before the conference championship weekend even happens. And then the conference championship weekends are just about celebrating the conference, right?
Yeah.
The individual conferences. All that other debate is done.
I hadn't thought of that. And I actually do like the sound of that. Like you say, it takes some of the drama out of the whole, final choosing. And, I guess on the one hand, it gives the conference championship games less stakes, which, like we just saw this past weekend, because Duke beat Virginia, that opened the door for James Madison, right? So that wouldn't, that's those sort of possibilities wouldn't happen under this other system, but
that's correct.
But it gives more continuity to other aspects of the game, right? Gives more time to the bowl games, like you say, to make their decisions. But I guess the tricky thing is, from the conversations you and I have had, what has been proposed by the SEC and the Big Ten is not about doing a 16-team playoff where they get 3 guaranteeds. It's where they get 4, right? So the Big Ten and the SEC would get 8 teams in, while the Big 12 and the ACC get 2. So that adds up to 12 guaranteed right there, plus the group of 5. That's 13. So that accomplishes more of the goal of limiting the effect of the committee, them having less to choose from. But the Big 12 and the ACC obviously rejected that proposal, because they're like, we're not giving you that kind of power, which is why I personally think having 3 for the Big 10 and the SEC is a good middle ground, where you acknowledge that, okay, you guys have, more high quality teams in your conference, so you get an extra, but we're not going to give you double what we're getting.
Right. And you know what? Maybe that would have worked if the Big Ten was willing to go there this past summer. But now that the way this is played out, and Sankey is sitting there with 5 teams, he would never accept 3, unless his proposal, which was nothing. What was their proposal? Nothing is guaranteed, or everybody got 2. You remember what their counter proposal was?
Well,
And it left a bunch of them open for selection.
I
So it
see.
gave all the power to this damn committee. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. And wasn't the other aspect that the Big Ten was actually the one that was advocating to go to 24 while the SEC was saying 16?
Correct. Well, yeah, they were. I mean, the Big Ten was willing to discuss even larger quantities than 16, where the SEC was like, no, we don't want more than 16. But the one that the ACC and the Big 12 said, we like that one better. I think it just guaranteed one. I think just the conference champion was the only one that was guaranteed. And so there would be basically the 4 Power Fives, and then the best group of 5. There's 5, and then the rest, right? So 11 were selected.
Right. That is basically what we're set for next year, because there was a memorandum of understanding signed between the college football playoff and the conferences in Notre Dame last spring. And part of that memorandum of understanding says that if Notre Dame is ranked in the top 12, then they are guaranteed to be in. So under this year's rankings, they would have been in over Miami because of that rule, regardless of the head-to-head and all the other things. And the other change that it involves is that it also guarantees that the Power 4 conferences all get their conference champion in, plus one group of 5 champion, whereas the current rule is that it's the top 5 ranked group of 5 or overall college football conference champions, which I think everybody assumed would usually be the top 4 Power 4 champions. And one group of 5. But of course, we've had a scenario this year where they managed to get in 2. So what you just described with the Big 12 and ACC apparently liked is basically what we're signed up for next year, but that still leaves the conference championship, issue out
questionable
there.
Right. Well, it does. And it puts way too much power in that committee's hands.
Right.
Because effectively they're going to be choosing, like they are now. They're choosing all these teams. And they have demonstrated now for literally 15 years, going back to the beginning of the 4-team playoff, that they can't be trusted to make the right choices, and they are too heavily influenced by their television partner who writes the check. They just are. And I you're never going to be able to convince me that that's not true. And I could go through year by year and highlight examples where a choice was made that clearly was not logical or did not correlate with their supposed, priority of, evaluation. Other than the fact that they wanted to get a certain team in there for revenue purposes for the SEC and ESPN's products. I mean, I could pretty much go every year and find that.
Right.
Maybe there might be one year where I would struggle to make that argument, but the vast majority of them, I think it would be quite easy to highlight that.
Right. And last thing I'll say on this is, even though I said that our proposed 16-team playoff we've been discussing would take some of the stakes out of the conference championship game, which is true in terms of getting into the playoff, but it would still have meaning for seeding, right? Because you'd be guaranteed to be in the playoff, but your rank within that top 12 could change based off the win or loss, like we just talked about with Ohio State and Indiana, right?
Right.
So there would still be stakes to it from that perspective, which I think would make people interested. So even though in the past I've been the one on the podcast kind of being like, I want to keep the playoff as small as possible. I want to keep the sanctity of the regular season intact as much as possible. But given where we're at with college football and the pressures to go to 24 and the threats to the conference championship games, as we've been discussing, I'm kind of nailing in on this. Okay, I'd be okay to expand to 16 with us guaranteeing the conference champions in this way, as we've discussed.
Oh, so you're in the camp of go back with a proposal that the Big Ten and the SEC get 3 or 2?
3.
So your proposal is 3.
I mean, I could be convinced.
I love that.
to let the SEC and the Big Ten, get to, but I don't think they would agree to that, right? They would reject that,
Right.
getting the same as the other two Power Fours. So I think you have to give
Right.
them 3.
Right. And maybe that's where they ultimately fall, right? Because if they did that, like you say, that would basically commit, let's see, 10, and
10,
then
yeah.
group of 5, 11, and then a Notre Dame special dispensation, 12. So you'd be choosing 4 or 5 teams a year that are in the at-large category.
Right. And we'd still have our fights about them for sure, but
Right. Oh, yeah.
it would lower the temperature at least, right?
Well, no, I don't think it would, because think about that. With a quantity of 5 teams that they get to choose at large, they could regularly choose 3 of those SEC, and they already got 3. So the SECs get 6.
Well,
And you say, oh, that's absurd. That's not going to happen. Trust me, they'll find a way if ESPN is still involved. I think they need to start rotating. They need to set up a requirement to rotate their media partners and not go out for bid, but get a collection of the media partners together and have media representation of all the media partners that are players in this. And they could come up with definitions as to who's a player and who's not, so that the ESPN influence would be removed, or at least neutralized to where there would be other competing interests, because they can't be trusted. They've demonstrated they can't be trusted.
I mean, I understand where you're coming from there, but good luck getting anybody to sign off on that. I don't see that happening.
I agree. I get it. Well, I would just like somebody to acknowledge that it exists. I'd like somebody on the committee, even if it's somebody who just walked off the committee because their 3 years was up, to be willing to have an interview where they acknowledge that they were influenced. When in hindsight, objectively in hindsight, I kind of have to admit that I was influenced by the fact that ESPN was always interviewing us. They were always asking the question and directing the conversation. And yes, we were influenced by the public reaction to each one of those shows. And that reaction was defined by the media partner that we were using. Period.
All right. So now, in terms of the actual playoff bracket, we have number 1, Indiana, number 2, Ohio State, number 3, Georgia, number 4, Texas Tech, all getting the bye. And then we have the 8 other teams playing. It should be noted, this year they'll be playing on the campus of whichever team has the higher seed, which is a change from last year that I think everyone is looking forward to. So that should be fun. And those other matchups are number 5, Oregon against number 12, James Madison. Number 6, Ole Miss against number 11, Tulane. Number 7, Texas A&M versus number 10, Miami. And number 8, Oklahoma versus number 9, Alabama. So Oklahoma, Alabama, obviously that's kind of an SEC team kill there, and a rematch from their game earlier in the year that Oklahoma won. So that one will be interesting, and the winner of that goes on to play Indiana from the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, which to me, again, if you're Indiana, and so you get this, proverbial bye, but then you have to play the Oklahoma, Alabama winner, rather than getting a chance at, possibly an easier draw. Now, granted, I get that would require an upset, and it's probably less likely to happen with James Madison and Tulane probably going to be large underdogs. I mean, it was Ole Miss against Tulane, right? Which they played earlier in this season, and Ole Miss won by like 5 touchdowns.
Right.
So you would expect that might not even be a very good football game, and I suspect Oregon against James Madison is going to be similar, right?
Right.
So you got 2 potential blowouts with those 2 games. Won't hold an audience. Probably not going to get very big numbers, right? Unless something crazy happens. And then the Oklahoma Alabama game is an interesting matchup, except that it's already been played this year, which always tends to diminish the eyeballs, right? The TV audience. So then those first round games, are they really enticing?
Right. Well, the A&M Miami one, that's a good matchup. That'll
Yeah,
be
that
interesting.
is. Yeah, that one will be good.
Yeah.
But that's the only one.
Well, and the Oklahoma Alabama game previously, like it was a close game, so I'm sure it'll be, competitive again. Frankly, if you're Indiana, I know you're saying kind of making it sound like they're getting the run of the deal, but I think they would much rather play against Alabama, given, how Alabama's kind of struggled here at the end of their year versus playing against a Oregon, team that admittedly Indiana did beat earlier this year, but certainly did not dominate them, right?
Right. No, I'm with you. I'm just saying I look at that and I don't see as much of an advantage for the number one team in this setup as I would have expected, for lack of a better term.
Right.
None of those second round games are going to be easy.
No. Well, and we'll have to see, is Oregon or Ole Miss going to be the Ohio State from last year, right? Who gets to play kind of an easy team in their first round and then builds momentum, and actually, the teams that have the bye, the top 4 seeds, play worse because of the bye. We'll have to see if that continues to be a trend.
Right. If Lane Kiffin had not moved to LSU, I would have said Ole Miss is going to be that team. I would have speculated there. But now, yeah, it certainly is a possibility that Oregon could be that team this year as well.
Yep. And on next week's podcast, we'll do our proper breakdown of those first round games, give our predictions, also talk about all the bowl games that were announced. So we'll dive more into that stuff next week. But on the ramifications of this whole playoff kerfuffle and everything, obviously Notre Dame was the most vocal, being the one who felt like they got gypped out of their spot in the playoff. And they announced that they will not be playing in a bowl game in kind of protest of this decision. And they're not the only ones. There are other teams like Kansas State, Kansas, Iowa State, Florida State, Auburn, UCF, Baylor, Rutgers, Temple are all also opting out of playing in their bowl game. Some of those teams being 5-7 teams that just, barely would have squeaked into a bowl game. So from a Nebraska perspective, we were very happy to finally qualify for a bowl game last year after years of not doing it. So the fact that these teams are opting not to play it is quite strange to me.
Right. Well, and like I say, really the only one that's pseudo being done in protest is the Notre Dame decision, because they would have been playing in one of the premier bowls, of the bowl season, right? Given their ranking and everything. And so that is genuinely a protest. Some of the truly bowl eligible Big 12 teams that are opting out because of coaching changes, I find a little interesting. And the only thing I can think of is that, because they don't feel like they can put together their new coaching staff quickly enough to get them in place for, coaching the bowl game. And they don't want, the lame duck group to be coaching a final game. I don't know. Just seems a little odd to me. And as it turned out, the Big 12 didn't like those decisions very much.
No.
And so they fined those institutions $500,000 each for making that decision, because the Big 12 as a conference is saying, okay, you guys, we have media partners here with these bowl games, and now we're not able to fulfill within our own conference these bowl games because you guys are choosing to do this, and that is hurting us. And I get it that you have a coaching change, but in the case of Kansas State, their coach is retiring. You would have thought that would have given them the opportunity to really have a going away party, if you will, right? It seems weird that they're not, because they could have held most of a coaching staff together, I would think, long enough that that retiring coach could have coached his final game in a bowl game that his team earned.
Right.
Does that not seem weird to you?
Oh, it does seem weird. Not to mention, you get a payday for going to the bowl game. So they're not
Well,
only
yeah,
rejecting the money that they'd get from the bowl, but they're being fined, on top of
right.
it. Though in this world where, boosters are coming together with tens of millions of dollars for these buyouts of coaches, $500,000 seems kind of chump change in comparison, right?
Well, I'm sure that the conferences are doing that because that's the one they can justify. So no one's taking them to court over that $500,000 because they can say, "Hey, that's what the conference would have typically brought in." Now, and I would also say, other than the top 5 or 6 or 7 bowl games, I don't know the exact number. Other than those top tier bowl games, all the other bowl games lose money for the participating teams, meaning they get allocated a certain amount from the payout, um, and the rest of it goes to the conference to be distributed evenly among all the
Okay.
teams. And so a lot of times those lesser bowls, like our game, Nebraska is tied to the Las Vegas Bowl, for example, and we'll lose money as a university going to that bowl game. We're not going to get enough in the payout that we get to keep to pay off all the expenses that we're going to incur.
But, you get obviously extra days of practice with your players, in our
Yes.
case, because we might have some new coaches coming in and everything, getting them some early time with the team and these players that they'll be coaching next year. It's very valuable.
Oh, huge. And it's a game that doesn't count. So all your freshmen who are on a red shirt, limit of 4 games, this doesn't count as their fourth game. So all of those kids are available to play now. Okay. And so it's almost like, say, it's a spring practice. It's going to be an opportunity for those guys to travel to a cool destination. They're going to be able to enjoy some of the pomp and circumstance because most of these bowl games are basically chamber of commerce events, right? They're
Right.
convention and visitor
Tourism.
bureau tourism based, right? So they're going to have some fun stuff. They're going to get a bunch of merch. I mean, there's lots of fun stuff to do there. So to have your players not get any of that, even though you're not gonna you're not losing money, you're not losing more money. You're probably saving money as an institution a little bit, but I just think there's so many reasons for you to go ahead and do that, that it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to me.
Right. And then last piece of national news we'll talk about is that the finalists for the Heisman were announced today. Not too surprising. It's a bunch of quarterbacks. We got Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame, Fernando Mendoza from Indiana, Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt, and Julian Sayin from Ohio State. I know you seem to think after that conference championship game that Mendoza from Indiana may have sealed it, but is that your prediction?
Absolutely. I think that that's slam dunk. Now, understand that a lot of people who have those Heisman votes may have already voted, right? Even before the weekend, because I think they got their ballots maybe 2 weeks ago,
Right.
or more. So some of those guys may have already made their decision, and there is some argument that because you've got both Sayin and Mendoza from the Big Ten, that they may split some Big Ten region votes, right? Where some of the other uh, people that you described won't necessarily be competing in that way. So those are all possibilities, but I think that it's Mendoza, Mendoza, Mendoza. I think it's not going to be that close. I'll be shocked when they, make the presentation and they give it to him, and then they'll start talking about things like the point totals or the vote totals. I think it'll end up being not a landslide, but a comfortable margin for Mendoza.
Right. I should mention that Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame, he's actually a running back, so he's the sole
Right.
non-quarterback in attendance this year.
In one of the big games, one of the Miami game that they lost, he didn't do anything.
Mm.
Which usually for a running back, if you have a big game in which you don't rise to the occasion and not just have a slightly off game, but have a significantly off game like he did, I think he's on there because he's from Notre Dame and, he had a good season.
Right. And Nebraska didn't play well enough for Emmett Johnson to get nominated.
Right.
And I'll just add that I really hope that as part of these changes that are going on in college football, that the Heisman is delayed to after the playoff, because it seems crazy that we're, to your point, the fact that voters are voting before the conference championship games are even played is crazy. Not to mention that we have a whole playoff, especially if it expands to 16 teams and all that sort of stuff. Like, we got a whole other chunk of the season to go for the best teams in the country. So it feels like you should really wait until that's all said and done before you crown who's the best player.
Yes, but I'm going to say that's college football tradition. That's been the case going back decades and decades and decades, because, they've always voted in early December here. That has been their time frame, and it's always been before the bowl games or anything like that. And it almost became a curse, right? I mean,
right.
There have been periods of decades where whoever won the Heisman Trophy never won their bowl game, so because they get so much hype and they go on the chicken circuit and get so much glad handing that the player ends up not having his best, most focused game on his next game. Right?
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. But I don't know. There's a big difference though between, I guess, two games potentially, right? A conference championship game and a bowl game. Now you're adding, 3 or 4 playoff games on top of that. Now you're talking about basically like half a season's worth of games that you're not even considering.
I totally agree. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just telling you tradition is gonna preclude that logic from ever seeing the light of day. I don't think.
Well, we'll see. I think it might change, but
yep. When all the people who are voting are your age or old or younger.
There you go. Then on the Nebraska side of things, we'll keep this part shorter, but there have been some interesting developments on the Nebraska side. One cool thing was Emmett Johnson, our star running back, was announced as the Big Ten running back of the year. So he was being justly honored for his success this season. And unsurprisingly, he declared for the NFL draft, so he will not be playing in our bowl game. I'm sure our Holgerson, our offensive coordinator, is currently working on how the heck am I going to score points against a very good Utah team in the Las Vegas Bowl without my star running back around.
Right. And equally significant is the fact that he not only is he not going to have his running back, but he's not even sure who his quarterback's going to be.
I actually don't know about Latif's injury. Is that still a serious concern?
Oh yeah, he pulled his hamstring, and he is not practicing.
So
we might be playing this game with Gramstead as our starter.
Right.
And of course the running back stable minus EJ. So
right. Yes, because we're playing against Utah in the Las Vegas Bowl, which some of the experts had already called out previously as a likely matchup for us. A Utah team that's currently ranked like 15th, I want to say, in the college football playoff rankings. So yeah, we're getting put there because we traveled so good. And Nebraska fans will still come out to that game and everything, but apparently we're 14-point underdogs, and if TJ is really hurt, that spread margin will only grow bigger.
I agree, and it's crazy if you look at overall the matchups for the Big Ten. It's not a good look.
Right.
There's a lot of tough matchups, but I almost would have rather played a Tennessee, or some of the other teams that got matchups than the one that we got. And keep in mind that there's certainly lots of discussion that the Utah coach, who is nearing the end of his career, might very well be announcing a retirement. So you're going to have this super motivated team that wants to send their coach out a winner.
Right. And to add to the shakeups going on in this mid-bowl time period for Nebraska, is not only is our defensive coordinator gone, as we discussed last week, but also is announced that our offensive line coach, Donovan Raiola, was fired in the past few days. Now, that's not a huge surprise for those who have been listening to this podcast. Our offensive line has struggled throughout the year, has not been great in any of the years that Donovan Raiola has been our offensive line coach. Now, obviously, he has a big last name, that played an influence probably in us getting our star quarterback, Dylan Raiola. So, of course, there's lots of speculation about Dylan's future with the team now that his uncle is no longer with the program.
Right.
But I think it was a good move on Matt to pull the trigger, knowing that he's in some hot water for having kind of underperformed this season. He's trying to get some new blood in, a defensive coordinator and offensive line to kind of fill in the areas where we've really struggled this year.
Right. I would agree with you. I'm a little surprised at how quickly he pulled the trigger on their replacements. That's the part that is a head scratcher to me. I understand why you want to go ahead and make those decisions. That's both the best and fairest thing to do to the people that you're letting go, because that gives them the largest window of opportunity to find other employment with another team. But it also gives you a chance to have maybe the largest pool of potential candidates to pursue, right? So for all those reasons, I get why he wanted to make sure he announced those changes as soon as the season was over. But it's the replacements that have me more concerned than the departures.
Okay. Well, we should say that the replacements are not official, but they've been reported from multiple sources. So, it seems pretty likely that these are the guys that Matt is going with. So first of all, defensive coordinator. He's apparently targeting the defensive coordinator from San Diego State University. His name is Rob Arick. Now, obviously, San Diego State is a FCS school, so this is a big jump for him, jumping up from that level to the Big Ten.
No, San Diego, they're not an FCS school. They're Division I.
I'm sorry, you're right. They're group of five. This Rob Arick guy has some accolades to him that, you can see why Matt was interested in him. He's nominated for the Broyles Award this year for assistant coaches because of the improvement he's made at SDSU. They went from 97th in scoring defense last year to 5th this year overall in the country. Right. He runs a 4-2-5 defense, and they do have good stats against the running game. They shut out Cal, who they played this year, held Boise State to 7 points. They're a 9-3 team overall this year. So while I know that you mentioned on the last podcast that you're hoping for Matt to get somebody with Big Ten experience because you think that's very important and being able to know how to deal with the running game in the Big Ten, this guy is a younger coach who clearly has something going behind him, if he's got all this momentum, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The real question though is when you're trying to put together a staff to compete consistently in the Big Ten Conference, one of the key factors, if you look on the staffs of the other teams that we compete against every year, those staffs are filled with people who've been in this league a while, right? Now that's not to say that no other team, gets guys on their staff that are from outside the Big Ten. That's not my point. But for the coordinator jobs, that is my point. Okay. And we're now looking at basically our third defensive coordinator in 3 years for Coach Matt Rule. And none of them had any defensive coordinating experience within the Big Ten. Okay. None of them. And only one of them had coached in the Big Ten prior to being a coach at Nebraska or the coordinator at Nebraska. So that's That's kind of significant to me, right? I, I would have thought he would have tried to go after someone that was already proven and utilize the resources that he claims Nebraska has to go out and get themselves, be a big boy, go out and spend big boy money and get yourself a premier defensive coordinator, somebody from the Big Ten or the SEC, who's got 5-8 years of experience, being successful in one of those premier conferences. That I would have loved. Okay. And there's been enough changes in coaching staffs and both of those conferences that there is plenty available. There's plenty of guys who were available, or you go get somebody that you want, that you target, even if they're currently employed, and you pay them so much money that their current employer isn't willing to match it, and you get that guy. You do your research, just like you have to do when you're pursuing a portal player, and get a guy who's performance based instead of potential based. We chose a potential based guy. He might end up being great, Alex, no doubt. But our recent experience tells us there is an adjustment period for just about any coordinator who comes into the Big Ten league without previously being in the Big Ten.
Right.
It just is a truth.
But Cignetti, right, was hired from James Madison, right? And clearly he adapted the Big Ten pretty quick.
Yep. Now, I love how everybody always uses Cignetti now as the example. Cignetti is not the typical, right?
Right.
But, he actually addressed this. This is kind of interesting. He addressed this when and I don't remember if this was before the game or after the game. I just remember seeing the interview. I don't know when the interview actually took place, but he was asked about his defensive coordinator and the success that they were having and that sort of stuff. And he said, well, we've been really rock solid on our defensive philosophy for the last 8 years. So that went back to even before his days at JMU, right? And his whole point was he had been, the thing with him was he had a group of coaches that had been together for a long time. And he had brought by and large, his entire group with him in his previous stops, right? And he was very confident schematically and conceptually, and that everyone else knew what was going on and what the philosophy was and what we were trying to teach. And no one was kind of outside the bubble. They were all invested, committed. This system works, and they believe in it, and they know how to coach it, right? That's different than, say, a Scott Frost, who was in like his second year or third year at UCF when he came to Nebraska, and he brought his whole staff with him, and they were a bunch of coaches who had been together for just a couple of years and had basically, one really good year together, right? Their previous 2 years had been a stepping stone of improvement, but they hadn't been exceptional. There's a difference. And the way Cignetti described that, it was about the fact that they had done experimenting while keeping the same guys around. Now it seems like we don't do that. There was clearly enough of a difference in philosophy after one season that Coach Rule realized that Butler's not my guy. He may be a great coach, but he's not the right coach to be on my staff because there's some philosophical disconnections here, right? There's two ways to address that. You fire the guy and get somebody else in, which is the maybe quicker, easier fix, or you go to work, you roll up your sleeves and say, okay, we need to get down to the X's and O's, and we're going to spend this off season grinding it out, and we're going to come to an agreement as a staff, and we're going to all buy in 100%.
Right.
And we're gonna make this work, and then it might take a few more years before that comes to fruition because you got to recruit to it and all that other stuff.
Well,
but at least you're committed.
Right. Well, but Matt Rule doesn't have another, 3 years. If we're 6-6, 7-5, for the next 3 years, he'll be fired. Nebraska fans will not.
Oh, I know, but he just decided on a coach that has no Big Ten experience.
Yeah.
So even if the guy he's young, he may be very talented, but he's got a lot to learn. And you don't think he's going to get schooled by offensive coordinators, from Ohio State and Oregon, and who else do we play next year? One of the other big boys, I think, might be Penn State again. Indiana. Okay, so we're going to have to face all three of those schools with their established, demonstrated, talented systems on offense, and we're going to be being coached by a guy who has 1 year as a coordinator. He has 1 year. Prior to that, he hadn't been a defensive coordinator. He's a young guy.
Right.
And, he might be a really good coach, but he's going to get schooled. Next year's not going to go well for us. I don't think we can expect it to go well defensively, or if it does, it's dumb luck.
No.
Now, if he does it 3 years or 4 years in a row, then now we got it pen to paper. We got real data, and we can say, okay, now this guy is now a performer.
Well, but let me say this. If he actually turns around our defense and we're much better there next year, it's not just dumb luck, right? There's X's and O's to it, but it would be something more like the Bo Pelini, right, in his early years, where he was ahead of the game on some defensive schemes that offenses weren't prepared for. Maybe this guy has something similar to that. But in which case, you only have that advantage for a short amount of time, right?
And it's still right. And it's still about the Jimmies and the Joes. And so it's about recruiting and stuff. And the fact that if he was a Frank Broyles, finalist or whatever, that means he has a component of him that was probably really good at recruiting, because typically the Frank Broyles Award winner is a person who's not only a good coach, but is also dynamic in terms of bringing talent in or identifying talent, right? So there's a bunch of components to this that might be really good. My only argument is, if you're coaching for your job, and I think you and I are in agreement, and certainly within the media of Nebraska, everybody's tone has changed from, Matt Rule's making progress. We're happy that, we like so much about what he's doing. And I've said that a bunch of times, to where now, because of these last two games and the performances we had against Penn State and Iowa, and what's likely to happen to us in this bowl game, that's all gone. Okay. The goodwill that he has accumulated is now officially consumed. And I think Matt Rule understands he has to win now. He should understand that.
Right.
And yet he chose a guy that had no Big Ten experience.
Well,
that's risky. That's very, very risky.
Well, supposedly, right.
Yeah, but that sounds like somebody who didn't want to spend the money, or who got outbid. Now, he wasn't our first choice. We had brought in another guy, at least one other guy, the previous weekend, and we weren't able to come to terms with that guy. And then he immediately became Syracuse's defensive coordinator rather than ours, after the weekend was over and we weren't able to arrive at a conclusion. And the word on the street is that he wanted to bring his own coaches carte blanche. He wanted full control, and Rule was unwilling to give him that, because Matt's still the head coach, and there were certain coaches that were already on his staff that he believed in and felt were important for us to retain. And that guy wasn't willing to accept that.
Right. What you were just saying about Cignetti, right, and maintaining cohesion within a coaching staff, right? That has value as well.
Oh, huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. This guy, Vince Carez, is who you're talking about. He was the Toledo defensive coordinator previously.
And again, a guy who was very highly regarded, also a 4.25 guy, and very highly regarded, and ended up like I said, at Syracuse when we didn't come to terms with him.
Right.
But not Big Ten experience.
Right. Yeah. No Big Ten experience.
Right. So the two guys he went after, neither of them had Big Ten experience. Maybe Matt Rule hasn't yet learned the lesson. I would hope that he would have, but it appears that he hasn't.
I'm more optimistic than you. I think that this guy sounds like he has some interesting ideas. So jury's still out.
I think so, Alex. Totally. The jury's still out. I am I'm not critical of those guys. I'm critical of Matt Rule.
Well, right.
Again, as a leader, I look at him as a leader and the decisions he makes. And this is another in now a series of decisions that lead me to the conclusion that he doesn't fully get what needs to happen for us to be successful in the Big Ten.
Right.
He still is trying to figure it out.
I will add to your point about the Nebraska media, the positivity and the goodwill going away. I think that is all true, but it's also true. Matt's not on the hot seat next year because we gave him an extension, and his buyout is now something like $70 million. So he's got another few years at minimum to turn it around, but he knows that the clock is ticking for him on that now.
Yes. Well, and it doesn't matter. We will suffer through 3 years of misery and lack of success and deterioration of our program, all because of the almighty dollar. Because I'm telling you, nationally, we are on the cliff, and we either have to figure out a way that we can turn the momentum of this thing around and get going the other way so that we can continue the slight positive trends that he has established, or we're going to go off the cliff. And the schedule that we have next year is not going to help us. Had we gotten 9 wins this year, then next year's 6-win season would have been okay. He was unlucky. He lost his great running back. There, we would accept some excuses because we had a 9-win season where he demonstrated the progress that we know we can get to. We just got to be patient, right? But if we go from 7-5, 7-6, which will probably be after this season, and we go back to 5-7 or worse, that's not going to go well for Matt Rule, because he's going to lose. He's hanging his hat on his 27 class. He's got one of the premier quarterbacks, and he's got a premier running back. He's got the makings of a great 27 class. Do you think that's going to stay together if we end up 5-7 next year?
Right. I mean, I'm impressed he's gotten those kids to commit, given the mediocrity or success he's had so far, so,
right.
Right. There's something more than just the wins on the field that those kids are seeing or being sold or whatever.
Right.
And obviously money is part of it, but yeah.
But you know what? I would say that's probably number 3 or maybe number 4 on that list.
Right.
Our facilities are outstanding. Matt is an incredibly dynamic guy. The fan base is super committed and has been for decades. So there's a bunch of positives that a kid can identify to choose to go to Nebraska. But then when it gets close to signing that paper and you're looking at a team that is floundering and going the wrong way, and you still have a choice, and you're getting all kinds of messages in your ear from your agent and all the people around you and the other teams recruiting you that, hey, are you sure you want to go join that drowning ship over there, that sinking ship? Come over and play with us.
Right. Yep. Next thing we have is the offensive line coach replaced Donovan Raiola. Once again, reported, but the word is that it's the Georgia Tech offensive line coach, Jeep Wade. Yeah, he's more of an experienced guy compared to Rob Aurick, and also has some accolades behind them. Georgia Tech was near the top of the ACC in their running game offensively this year, and also was low in terms of the number of sacks that they permitted, that they let through. So those are both signs that Nebraska fans will be happy to see, but of course comes with the caveat: this is coming from the ACC, not the Big Ten or the SEC, right?
Exactly. And the low sack total is because they were a running team. Their quarterback had over 1,000 yards. Okay. So how much did they really throw it? How many times did he, because of his athleticism, have escapability that kept something from becoming a sack? So the sack number, to me, doesn't have much wow. The fact that he knows how to put together an offensive line that can run the football, to me, is a big deal. I am going to wait and see with this guy as well, because again, he's been a coach for a while, but he has bounced around a lot, most of it at lower levels, right? Tennessee, Chattanooga, Tennessee, different small schools.
Right.
But he's been at Georgia Tech for 3 years, and they've been good at running the football for 3 years. So, that's a good sign, right? It's not just a 1 year wonder. This guy's been doing it for 3 years at Georgia Tech, and he was successful at his previous things. And he's been an offensive coordinator before, so he understands how offensive line play integrates with the rest of an offense, which I think is valuable.
Right.
And looking at the, again, much like an offer list, South Carolina, if we hadn't signed this guy, or if we hadn't gotten a yes from him, he was likely going to become the O-line coach at South Carolina, who also is a team that loves to run the football. So he chose us, over South Carolina, that's significant.
Yep. So those are the coaching shakeups. Obviously, if these don't turn out to be true, we'll talk about the other guys on a future podcast, but seems pretty firm that they're probably happening.
Yeah.
And then last thing we'll mention on the football side is that, although this affects all Nebraska sports, is that the 1890 collective, which has been the kind of third-party NIL collective for the various players at Nebraska, is officially disbanding, and they're centralizing everything under Nebraska's, in university NIL fund, their athletic fund, which is apparently something that several universities are doing, as the revenue sharing has become, the way to go. I guess you maintain more control and transparency that way versus going through these third-party organizations. But you were quite shocked when you heard that news.
I was. I knew that was a possibility, but because of the unique nature, not unique, because of the nature of Nebraska's collective and how we had structured ourselves, and how, one of our main donors was basically footing the bill for the whole infrastructure of it. So that, any monies that anybody else donated were 100% going to go to the athletes, right? So it allowed for very clear messaging, and it allowed them to build some support structures for student athletes that kept them separate from the university. So it almost became a place where an athlete could go to get guidance and stuff, where especially when he or she maybe weren't, as locked into whatever the messaging was coming from the athletic department. Now that that's all integrated inside, it's going to be a more consistent message. But that sounding board aspect's probably going to be diminished. And there's all kinds of logistical things that now need to be worked out. The Husker Athletic Fund, as of today, as far as I know, it doesn't have the infrastructure digitally to support, monthly donations, recurring automatic deduct type stuff.
Right.
And 1890 does. So hopefully this transition is going to include bringing in the ability to do that. It's also going to open up some other doors where you're able to integrate and parse donations into various buckets, right? Some NIL, some athletic fund, traditional things for infrastructure and facilities and things of that nature. So it's going to give them some flexibility. It's also going to give them full control. So, for example, they could go to some of their sponsorship partners, say a bank or a car dealership or whoever, and say, hey, we would like you to redirect some of your sponsorship dollars into this NIL area so that you can pay athletes directly. And we will forego taking it in through the athletic fund, and we'll have you do this over here. So it just gives a ton of flexibility for them to do that, right? And it also allows, since it's the Husker Athletic Fund, that they could, for example, take a an individual game ticket and add a $15 athletic fund charge that could go to NIL. Okay, so and there are already other schools that started that this year, where they had basically a surcharge on all of their sports tickets to pay for the athletes, and I think you're going to see that utilized as well.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see how the NIL whole situation continues to evolve in this crazy world that we're, going through, and bringing more in house and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then lastly, we wanted to comment quickly on the women's volleyball team, as we've been doing throughout the season. Of course, they've been playing in the NCAA tournament as the number one seed in the whole tournament, and they won solidly 3-0 against LIU and Kansas State. So now moving them on to the Elite Eight.
Nope, the Sweet 16.
Right. And we just played against Kansas State. Now we're playing against Kansas. And then we'll have, after that, the winner of Texas A&M and Louisville.
It's been interesting. Their game against Kansas State actually was one of the lowest offensive performances in terms of effectiveness, hitting percentage, that they've had since the Creighton match back in September. They were just a little off, and that freaked a lot of people out. In the social media area and others, but their defense was still incredible, and their effort was there. They just were, I think, a little nervous. It wasn't the best game our setter has ever played. And so there's just a little bit of doubt until we can get another data point in there, hopefully against Kansas, where we play efficiently. But if we play against Kansas or our second opponent like we did against Kansas State, we won't last very long in this tournament. Now we are the number one seed, and it really says something that we really want a fairly comfortable 3-0 victory against a fairly talented Kansas State roster, while not playing our best volleyball. In fact, some of the worst volleyball we've played all year. So that speaks to how talented and how high our ceiling is, but we need to achieve that. And so I'm particularly nervous, actually, going into this next match, where I hope we can right the ship on offense and be effective again, like we have been historically through this season. So because that second game, presuming we do beat Kansas against either Louisville or Texas A&M, that one is going to be really, really tough. Whichever one of those teams comes out of that matchup is going to be a very difficult out for Nebraska. Now, we are going to be playing at home. We are the better team in comparison to either one of those squads, but both of those teams have elements that we haven't seen very often this season, in terms of having a diversity of strength within their roster that we haven't had to face very much. And I could even say that's true about this Kansas matchup, because they're going to be bigger than we are. Their front line is 6'4" outside hitter. They have a 6'7" opposite, who's from Serbia, I think, and is very powerful. She's big. She's just really big. And when she swings, man, and she's a great server also. Okay. So we're gonna have to pass really well. The key for us is going to be serve and pass in this game, and that's always true. But that's going to be particularly true against Kansas in this matchup, because we've got to be able to pass the ball well.
Well, let's hope our Big Ten Coach of the Year, DBK, has a good week of practice with the girls here to get them kind of settled and playing better in these upcoming games.
Right. If you ask me to pick, I still believe we're by far the best team, and we should come out of that region. And there's a bunch of other great matchups. I mean, for anybody who's even a borderline interested party to watch volleyball, this weekend is going to be really the hallmark of the volleyball season, because it's not just a Final Four where there's just 3 games. It's going to be a Sweet 16 down to a Final Four. So there's just a ton of great volleyball games that are all going to be being played in this 3-day stretch. I guess it is 3 days.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is a 2 long podcasts in a row that we've put together, but there was a lot to talk about. We talked about future of college football and the playoff, and obviously a lot about the future of the Nebraska football program as well. So we'll have to see how things keep evolving on both fronts. We'll come back to you next week with a proper prediction episode for the bowl games, as well as the first round of the college football playoff, properly preview the Utah matchup for Nebraska. And get here into the final phase of the postseason for college football.
Well, and there's a laundry list of other subjects that we didn't even touch in today's podcast that were exposed by this, horribly executed committee, which our athletic director is a member of that committee.
Yep.
So we are not without our own fault in this as a university. But there's some major implications. And if you see what's going on with the portal and with how people are managing or creating NIL situations and such, things are literally out of control. And I just don't know how long it can be sustained.
Yes. Well, you've been saying that for a couple of years now. So
that's true.
So I'll have to see.
That's true.
But yeah, we hope you out there enjoyed listening to this podcast and our analysis. You can reach out to us at collegefootballthrowdown@gmail.com. We'll all love reading listener feedback out on the air. You can also find us if you search for College Football Throwdown on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can subscribe to us on any of those platforms. Leave us a rating there. We always love hearing feedback from the fans. So thank you out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.